and welcome to another Angular Americas event. Today we have an exciting lineup and schedule for everyone. We are going to go over a bunch of fun Docker stuff, but we'll have our Angular news. I think, have an Angular quiz I think Natty was working on. We'll see about that maybe later. But a lot of fun stuff today. So first off, how are you guys doing? What's been happening? Bonnie, how has your week been?
It's been crazy. Good stuff though. Samantha's finishing up a few videos. There have been, I think, a couple people in here helping her with the videos. And so we're gonna release something soon. I've actually really been trying to get everything in line for the job fair, which is next weekend, a week from tomorrow. So that's the big thing that I'm excited about. And I've been talking to the Angular team because we've had a few of those Angular RFC chats with the Angular team. We're gonna have more. So we've got maybe, possibly, I can't promise, but maybe we'll have 2 of those in October. We've also got the testing Q&A coming up. Last night we had Ask an Angular GDE. That was really fun. So yeah, there's been all kinds of stuff going on. Oh, and Samantha and I are doing a talk next week for Angular Singapore with Trung Vo. So lots of fun. Oh, can I say one more thing? Next Friday, a week from today, meet the Taiga team, you guys. And that's not even my thing. It's people asking me to go get the Taiga team and bring them because I haven't even seen Taiga yet, but apparently the people who have seen it like it a lot. So everyone said, Bonnie, we want to meet them. So, and when I went to stalk them online, because you know how I am, it's Alex Inkin and Roman. We know these guys. There were Alex with like the purple neon, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, anyway, the RxJS guys. So we're going to meet them next Friday. So yeah.
Wait,
lots of exciting stuff happening.
What's Taiga? I'm clueless on this.
Russian UI library.
Okay, gotcha. Very cool. And that was basically, you gave the Angular Nation news. Anything else for Angular Nation news that you have, Bonnie?
Just all of it. Oh yeah, well, okay, so I haven't actually officially announced this yet. So if you guys want to have an exclusive unannounced thing that has not been officially announced, we can do that. We were having, so I was actually, Jeff knows this, but I haven't told anybody publicly because we were having a call a couple weeks ago, one of our committees, and I was saying, like, I'm drowning in all this work and I really need to hire a community manager. And I just don't know who I would trust you guys with because I love the people here and I want the community manager to be the right person. And Jeff mentioned Carolyn, who is Jeff's wife that I've known for years, and I love her. And immediately I was like, oh my God, can we do that? So I have actually been talking to her behind the scenes. And so I'm writing an article to introduce you guys to Carolyn, who is going to be our community manager. And that's very exciting. And that will free up some of my time to focus on booking more events, right? And more community initiatives and things like that. And I also want to give a shout out to Simon Smith, who is in the call with us, who's been helping. Him and Edward have been helping a lot with automation and helping me figure out some stuff so that I'm not so overwhelmed all the time with administrative tasks. So there's been a lot of very exciting things because Angular Nation is growing, right? So now we have to figure out how to do it right, and just so many exciting things happening.
Yeah, very cool. I was actually in the Ask a GD session yesterday. I usually don't make those during the week because I'm so slammed, but that was fun. It was good. I'll definitely go again and would recommend it to everybody else for sure.
Yeah, it was really cool to have you. It was good because somebody had some questions about Universal and you were just like, oh yeah, that guy wrote Universal. You could ask him. He might know a little about Universal. Yeah,
I did follow up on that. There was an open question after that session that I posted some ideas for caching with Angular Universal.
So, if you had the time in your schedule to transfer all of the knowledge in your brain to the rest of us, it would be so great. So great. We'll take the snippets that we can get.
Well, there's actually someone in the Angular community working on that. Oh man, what's his? Now I'm forgetting it. He was Angular GD, worked for Netflix. I can't. Just
Ryan
been so long.
Burgess?
No, not Burgess. But
Jim Young.
He's working on a product that Neurosity or something that one of those things.
It's Alex.
Hook up to your brain. Alex, yes.
His name is Alex.
I forget
Castillo.
Castillo, yes.
Alex Castillo.
used to talk to him all the time, but because we haven't been going to conferences and that type of thing, these, old man brain, everything kind of falls away. And
do you think people would be interested if we could get him? I love.
Oh
that
yeah,
guy.
you should definitely have him on.
You want me to go get him and bring him?
It's so cool, the stuff he's working on. Yeah. So like
I love him. Yeah. Do you think he's still using Angular for that? Because he started out using Angular.
I don't know if he's still using. I mean, his stuff is more like back end with the product that they're working on, but he's an Angular.
I would love to catch up with that guy.
But for those,
I'm gonna. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, for those people that don't know what we're talking about, like Elon Musk has like the Neuralink, which is that they've been working on, which is like it hooks up to your brain to like detect certain activity and then respond to it, so you can like eventually, the idea is that you can actually take action in the real world based off of just your thinking or whatever. And so there's actually a bunch of, it's a whole field of products of people working on this type of thing. So Alex is one of the people creating a product along these lines. He's focusing mostly on developer productivity so that it kind of monitors your brain waves as you're coding, and it sees and it sort of tracks when you're the most productive, and it will start to give you signals to help hone you in on your like getting in the zone. Like that's the whole thing, is they want to get you in the zone faster.
Keeping you there longer.
Yeah. So it's cool. Definitely.
I knew him before he left Netflix to start Neurosity, and I just think he's such a cool human. I will reach out to him immediately and see if I can invite him and tell him that everyone wants to meet him.
That'd be great. Cool. All right. So let's go to the next section. Kyler, what do you have for Angular news for this week?
I've got a little bit here. So Angular 13 Next.9 was released yesterday on September 30th. It has several changes, but the most notable include add support for types in view container ref create component. That'll be super helpful if you're dynamically loading components. Angular Router will emit an activate and deactivate event when an outlet gets attached or detached. So that's going to be super helpful. There are going to be a couple breaking changes, but I don't know how widely used these APIs are. No longer possible to use route.loadChildren using a string value. So the ng module factory loader and the system.js ng module factory loader classes are removed from Angular core. And the Angular router will no longer export the SPI ng module factory loader or the deprecated load children. So if you're using setup testing router function from Angular core testing, the signature has changed to not accept ng module factory loader as a parameter anymore, since it can't be created. That's all I have for the Angular piece, but I'm starting to look more into the community and kind of share some more community Angular ecosystem like news. So Transloco v3 is out now, and they moved to NX. This version has several bug fixes, and we have AG Grid version 26.1 has been released, and that now fully supports typed Angular components. So no longer is everything typed any, which is going to be extremely helpful for me and my team. There is a member who created an annotated Angular roadmap on GitHub, which is super helpful, right? Because the Angular team posts the roadmap, but it's a little bit more broad. But what this guy is doing is he's finding links to PRs. He's adding a little bit more context around changes that are coming. So it's super helpful to help you keep up to date with what changes are coming and when it's coming. So I will share these. That's a really
cool effort, Kyler. Where did you say you can find that? Like I love that concept, because I often think that when I see the notes that I'm like, I feel like there's like these large stories behind some of these like notes, and if you do your own research, you'll eventually find it, but it's great that somebody kind of just adds it all together.
Yeah, so I've got several links I need to share with today, in the chat. So this one on GitHub I just shared. It's called the Annotated Angular Roadmap. You can find that at the link I just shared in the chat. There's only two things I have left. Nathaniel Basil, I think that's how you say his name. He's teasing a new reactive state management library that's actually cross framework. So this will work for any JS framework, Vue, React. He's saying he'll have observable hooks for React and stuff like that. But we're Angular folks, so so naturally it'll work for us. It sounds like he's going to be able to handle side effects with actions or effect functions. So we've kind of we're familiar with that pattern in the Angular community. So that ought to be pretty cool to check out. Also, Fanis Prodromo, I think is how you say his name. He published Mastering Angular React. Okay, yeah. He published Mastering Angular Reactive Forms. And of course, that's a book. And you can buy a physical copy or an ebook copy. And I'll share the links to where you can find those. That should be pretty cool. And I think that's all I have.
Didn't now that you're saying this, I'm just like vaguely recalling from like the Twitter streams and whatever else. I thought I saw Manfield published a book too.
Manfred Steyer.
Yes.
Yeah,
he did
yes,
come
he
out
published
with
a book in German.
Yeah.
And I have
it's
a
in
copy
German.
of Dennis's new book, and I was just about to hold it up for you guys, but it's upstairs on my son's desk.
Right.
Yeah, Manfred Steyer did publish the third version of his book, but it is only in German, and there's no plans to get it translated into another language right now. So if you read German, it might be a good one to pick up.
Fair enough. I saw in the comments, so adding that new version of Scully, right, Sander?
Yep.
That is good stuff. Anything else?
I did a really silent release of that thing.
Okay. Silent but deadly.
Well, not
so-
deadly.
Yeah, I think Protractor is going away too. So
Well, that's been on the works for a while, right? Was there something
Yeah.
more like concrete that happened that you're thinking about? That did they actually?
no, I just saw the news yesterday.
Oh, okay.
So yeah,
Yeah, Cypress
Yeah.
is the way to go.
yeah,
Yeah, they had that news came out around the time Angular 11 released, I think it was. But I don't think Protractor is officially going away until version 15, if I remember right.
Rob, did you try Cypress yet?
No, I'm having the junior developer do the testing. So I know.
No worries, you can try it. It's
yeah,
it's pretty easy.
You just got to do the
Yeah.
proof of concept and get it all hooked up, and then let the junior developers take it back over again.
Okay, we'll do.
I guess the last thing I would add is that there is, starting to be discussions on, a future change in Angular for enabling Angular to run without modules. So that's something that starting to talk about among Angular GDs, and I think they have it publicly posted too, right, for comments, or if not, they will soon. I forget which they post publicly or not, but that's something for down the road that they're working on that should be fun and interesting. Cool. Anything else anyone else want to bring up in terms of Angular news in the community that you guys are aware of that we did not mention yet? Great. All right.
One
Okay,
more
yeah.
thing. I just posted a poll like half an hour ago, and I want you guys to all answer that poll because the Angular team actually wants to know. Sometimes when I'm asking you guys questions, it's not for me. So if you see a poll come through, just let me know what you think. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
No problem at all. That sounds good. Cool. All right. So let it get to the Docker discussion. So as a preface before I get into this, I'm going to share my screen and kind of go over some stuff. But in terms of like talking about different topics and that type of thing, I definitely, when I do a conference talk, like PowerPoint type talk, I'll spend I don't know for some of you that have done conference talks, but for me, I take a crazy amount of time. Like it's not a good thing. Like I got to figure out a way to do it faster because I spend like hundreds of hours preparing, usually tons of slides and very in depth. So that's not what this is going to be. That's all to say that. I have a topic that stuff I've been working deeply in. So it's going to be a little bit ad hoc. I literally wrote down on a piece of paper what I'm going to go over. So it's somewhat lightweight, and I encourage you all to type in at any time. Once I share my screen, actually, one annoying thing is it's hard for me to see other people, like their hands up and stuff like that. So maybe, Bonnie, if you see people starting to ask questions or whatever else, you can kind of facilitate that as well. Yes, yeah, if you could.
I'll try. Well, Sandra and Kyler and I can try to help them if we can, and if not, we will jump in and if we don't know the answer either.
Perfect. All right, share my screen. Okay, so talking about Docker, and first things first for installing Docker. There's a ton of ways to install Docker. You can do it through Homebrew or other means. I personally have downloaded the Docker desktop, which is executable. Like if you search for it, you can download it from, like, there's actually a company behind Docker. I believe they make money off of their consulting services or something. But anyways, it is a program that helps you run code within containers, either on your local laptop, or obviously you can deploy them to remote environments. And the Docker desktop is really just a tool. Underlying is the Docker software itself, but this will help you manage what is actually on your local machine. Actually, I haven't done this, but it might the Docker desktop might be able to connect to remote ones too. But I'll get to some of these specific containers later, but you could see just really quickly that you can kind of go through the containers that are running locally and see the logs, even get to the command line within each, etc. But the thing I wanted to mostly show with this, because I hardly ever go to this interface, I mostly interact from the command line for the stuff that I'm doing. But it is important when you're trying to run everything for your environment locally, not just like one container, but like I have like 9 or 10 containers running locally. It's really important that you go to your resources tab here. So in the settings and resources, and you almost certainly have to bump these like way up, because by default, I believe Docker settings they try to minimize or they don't allocate a lot of resources locally that you can use. But especially with like the latest MacBook Pro and that type of thing, you have more than enough horsepower to run a ton of stuff on your local machine, but you have to allocate it to or allow Docker to utilize that. So I think this was originally, something like 2 CPUs and just a couple of gigabytes of memory. It's like really small. So like I jacked it up pretty high in order to be able to run things effectively. And then when you do this, it's not that slow. And it still eats up memory, but it's not too bad. So let me close out of this. Okay. So for what I'm going to be showing you, this is from one of the code bases that I work on most of the time these days for GetHuman, and it is a monorepo. So there's a lot of stuff in here I'm not going to talk about, but I will focus on the various containers. And so for each instance, each running Docker container, there's a Docker file, and there's kind of 2 categories for, at least for the way that we do it. So, and I should preface too that a lot of things I'm mentioning, I haven't done the research to say what is the de facto like best practice. What I'm saying is what I've gathered, what is working really well for us. But don't take that as like this is definitively the absolute way to do things. So for us, I've sort of split all of our Docker containers into 2 categories. So one is like our custom code, our custom Angular and Node code. And the other side, underneath this containers folder, is all of the software, third-party software that I am running locally. So like the obvious examples that you guys would be familiar with is like Elasticsearch or Mongo or Nginx, right? Some of these you guys won't recognize, but it's a very similar thing. Dractio and FreeSwitch and Chameleon, those are all very similar. It's just third-party software that I'm running in my local Docker container. And so for each of these, there's a million different ways that you can set up each. And hey, Bonnie, really quick, there's a couple people that pinged to join. Are you allowed?
I got you, fam.
Okay, great. Okay, so for each of these, this is where definitely just the way we do things. So take it for what you will, because I've seen a million different ways of like variations of the way people set up their Docker files, set up like their start files, everything like that. So for us, at least, actually getting the FreeSwitch one is a good example. we have a like sort of standard of the way that we've set it up where usually in the Docker file, it's specifying how it's building the container. And for us, it's what is the original, there's layers of each container. So that's one thing that's important to understand is that if you build everything from scratch, it takes like forever. But Docker will cache these different layers of stuff that it builds for each container. And so usually for like the core layer, you're pulling it from something else, like so the operating system. But you can actually pull it from a higher level layer that somebody else shared out on Docker Hub as well. But for us, for this example with FreeSwitch, which you don't need to know what FreeSwitch is, don't worry about that. But we're starting off with just Debian, which is a Linux operating system, is our base layer. So this is a layer that somebody's shared out there, and we're saying, okay, that's the initial thing we're starting with. And then each of these commands kind of build on that layer. And so, this is basically going into the operating system, and it's running an apt-get to just start installing a bunch of stuff. And the key thing is, like, especially in terms of when you're managing your Docker instances locally, is that if you modify something, like if I add something within this run command right here, it will rebuild this layer and everything else below it, but it won't rebuild the higher layer. So typically, if I'm like at the lowest layer is just like my config and code changes. So when you're doing config and code change, if you're just doing that, the rebuilds are like really fast. But if I change even like one thing up here, it's like a 5-minute rebuild because it has to like go through like everything, adding it back again. Yeah, just a couple, again, you don't have to know the exact software, but just know at a general sense that it's kind of running a bunch of software on top of the basic operating system to install, like in this case, the basic FreeSwitch stuff. Then setting some volumes. I'll actually talk a little bit more about volumes in a second, but the basic gist of a volume is you're saying you're linking a folder within the Docker container to something that is outside the Docker container. And it's very useful for, well, a bunch of things that I'll get to once we get to the Docker Compose. But just know that this is like linking, this is saying that these folders within the Docker container, I'm going to link to something outside of the Docker container. And then down here is really the config changes. So like I usually within each of these container folders, I have a whole bunch of config. So there's the base software, whether it's FreeSwitch or Mongo or something else. And then usually I modify the config within that third-party software. And so you have to copy those configs into the container on top of the sort of default configs that come with the third-party software. So in this case, whatever, I modified a whole bunch of stuff for FreeSwitch. And then at the end, so this is one of these things where, again, there's a million ways of doing this. And so definitely, I've had other DevOps guys tell me that this is not the way they prefer, for sure. But I usually, hand off then to like a shell script to do the actual start command. Do that for a number of reasons. Just it kind of gives us more flexibility to make some changes in there that I'll show. But some people instead of this will just you could theoretically just run a command here. So instead of the entry point, like doing it as a shell script, you could just do like node start or whatever. You could just run the command here, and then you don't even need a separate shell script. But we do that just because during the startup, remember I mentioned that like at that very end, if you make modifications, it doesn't have to restart everything. So there's a bunch of stuff in here that like I will modify periodically from time to time because I know that like it'll rebuild quickly. So mostly like variable based. So like there's a whole bunch of environment variables that I'm changing in the config files, for example. And then actually this isn't a good example, but for, let me do RTP engine, I think. Yeah, so like then there's a bunch of command line options for the actual command to start the third-party software itself. And I just for our developers, I'll put the comments in here or whatever, or the different variations. But that's mostly what's going on in these start files is setting up the environment variables like that change from one environment to another, and then actually running that start command of whatever the third-party software is. So does that make sense so far? Everybody good for just like I'm going to get to the Angular stuff next. Okay. So that's all for third party, sorry for it. Then for our Angular stuff, so Node and Angular, actually I'll do the Node first because that's actually easier. So for the backend, I just have like a basic Node.js backend, and the Docker file is like super simple. Especially compared to the other stuff, because really I'm just, Node has its own Docker file. So this is like a higher level Docker instance. Like, so obviously underneath this, there's, Linux layer and like, whatever else. But this kind of gives it to you everything you need for a basic Node container. And I'm basically just adding my code to it, and then doing npm install and build and start. I mean, it's really, really straightforward for Node. For Angular, just only slightly more complicated. Yeah, similar setup. The one difference is that, and this will come to something I'll mention in a second, of when you're working locally. So if you weren't working in Docker, there's a lot of benefits to live code reloading and things like that, and debugging and whatever. So one of the things that's taken us a while is to find a good setup where you can do live reloading and debugging and everything like that, just like you would if you were running everything on your host system. And I'll mention about some of that in just a second, but in terms of live reloading, you won't, in your staging environment, you won't necessarily be running just the client side ng serve. Like you wouldn't just do ng serve in staging or production, because that's doing like using the dev only web server, and it does like the live reload thing and whatever, but you do want to do that in your development environment. So we'll have, and we heavily use just npm scripts just to like make sure, I always forget the different commands or whatever, so it helps at least a little bit for me. But this will change out for dev versus staging. So in dev, we're going to run start.browser, which just does the client side, doesn't do the server side, does the live reloading like normal, etc. Whereas when we go to, and we can do this temporarily for testing purposes in dev, so it's not like it doesn't work in dev, but when we go to staging production, we'll do start SSR, so it starts the server side, and that's what's actually running is the SSR through a Node.js server. was just trying to think if I was going to mention anything else for that. Nope. Okay. All right. So what ties this all together? So that was just like really quick overview of the Docker files and like each of the different kind of definitions of all this stuff running on my machine. But the thing that ties it all together is this Docker compose file. So this is what you actually run to basically run everything all at once. And it links everything together. So I'm going to go through this file and kind of point out what it's doing. So up at the top, the first thing is that we create a Docker network. So essentially we're creating kind of like our own private network on your local machine where you can define your own IP range and that type of thing. And it's really useful because if you aren't doing this, if you aren't using a private network within your local machine and you have a bunch of containers trying to talk to each other, it ends up typically being an issue with like, well, there's a bunch of different things that could go wrong. But as one example of many is if you have multiple containers that want to use the same port, let's say, you can't do that if you just have
Something happened to the audio? I cannot hear anything.
Yeah, I can't either. It looks like he froze.
I thought I froze.
Me.
Doing the robot dance, Bonnie?
Because I thought it was mine, but it wasn't. Well, let me see if we can ping him. I don't know if I have his phone number. Oh, let me ping him here and see. If his internet died, he might not know. This happened once before, and I called his wife on the phone, but I was living in Texas then, and I don't know if I can. Let me see. Yeah, see, I don't have his number, but I have hers.
Can you use WhatsApp?
I was just looking at the last time I sent her a message, and it was 2018. It was September 20th, 2018. And I was like, hey, Jeff just froze in the middle of a tech talk. Can you go smack him? And she was like, yeah. So I don't know. It could work. It says my message has been delivered. Well, if you guys don't mind, we can hang for a minute and chat and just give him a minute and see if he comes back. How do you feel? Sonder, how do you feel about the talk so far? Is it meeting your expectations?
It is iterating. There he is.
Hey!
You're muted because you're entered the thing right now.
So they're doing work in my house and they just cut all the power. I
Wow.
apologize. I switched to tethering on my phone.
I was just telling them about the last, because I opened up my phone and I was like, let me see if I can send Jeff a message to let him know. And I saw, and I said, no, but I have Carolyn's number. And then I went to send Carolyn a message, and the same thing happened 2 years ago because you were presenting, and then I had to message Carolyn. But
yeah. So sorry about that. So did you guys?
Well, I was just asking Sonder what he thought of the presentation so far, and he said it's going very well. So it's a good thing you came back.
Okay, good. Did you guys see when I opened up the Docker Compose file?
Yeah, you opened up the Docker Compose file and then you froze.
Okay, got it. Perfect. Okay, let me share my screen. Oops. Great. Okay, so Docker Compose. So I was talking about that. It's important to create Docker Compose file has everything that ties all of your Docker containers together. And the way it does this is first and foremost, it creates a private network on your local machine. And this is important because a lot of times your different containers are trying to use the same ports. I mean, most commonly, you know, you have a lot of web or API stuff trying to use port 80. Could be other ports as well. For us, like we have a lot of telephony stuff that's trying to use the same port. And if you try to run that on your local machine, you could theoretically change which ports each of the things use, but that's a pain too. So it ends up being cleaner in a lot of ways if you just have things technically running on these different virtual IPs within your private network, if that makes sense. So that's where you set up here, this private network. And then you'll see that for each of these containers, I assign what IP address each of them have. So this one, you know, 172.10.11, 172.12, etc. And then each of these containers can refer to each other by those IP addresses. And so in your Docker Compose, you're defining not just this private network, but then for each container, you're saying like a container is you know, the starting point, but when you actually run it, when you run a container, you can apply certain configurations to it, and the Docker Compose basically has what those minor or different configurations are for when it runs. And so running it, the image name is just, I mean, that's sort of arbitrary, so you can come up with your own scheme for like how things are named. I'll show you from the command line when it appears and whatnot. You're specifying where the Docker file is coming from on your local file system in this build context. Restart always just means if the main process fails for any reason, then it just automatically will restart, as opposed to if it fails and the Docker file just dies and just doesn't do anything. Okay, volumes. So this is where I'm going to go to the Angular code for this. So you'll notice that I set for volumes two things, but they're both source files where basically source code is. And the reason I do this is that so that when I make changes on my host system, it gets reflected on the container. So it's basically linking, it's saying all of the stuff within my local front end source directory is linked to the Docker source directory. And since I'm running it as ng serve, that means that I make the change here, it'll change it in the Docker container, and then the Docker container will automatically restart. Or well, technically the ng serve will restart the process or whatever. So that was one of the key things. And there's other variations of this that we use, like for obviously API has its own, well, it's similar thing. It's just node code, it's not Angular code. But we will run it with NodeMon, NodeMon watching the files underneath here. So it's a very similar thing. NodeMon is watching for any changes in these files, and when it changes, then it'll restart the process. So
Jeff?
Yeah.
You're using NodeMon and ng-serve. If you are deploying those things, I assume you are not using those tools anymore?
That's for dev, I was saying.
Okay, yeah.
I think I gotta look again what I use for production, but what do you usually use, Sander? What's that?
PM2 for
PM2, yeah. Yes.
And
yes,
Nginx as a front end for Angular applications.
Yes.
Or just hosting somewhere where I need to have it.
Yes, PM2 actually is what we mostly use. Just slipped my mind for a second. And then with ports, so what we're saying in this part of the configuration is that you are basically linking a port being used on the Docker container to your host system. And so this is useful in the cases where you have something running outside of Docker that you want to interface with something running inside Docker. So just as an example, because I have like, hold on a second, where is it? Okay, so Mongo, okay? We are running it from just like Mongo, the company has their own container that they've deployed on Docker Hub, and I'm just using the latest version of that. And I'm exposing the main Mongo port. So if I go on my host system, so right now, let me bump this up. Oops. Sorry, I'm trying to get it so you guys can read. So I'm on the command line on my host, my MacBook Pro. But if I just type in Mongo on the host system, it connects just like it would if Mongo was running on my local system, but it is running on Docker container. And the reason why this works is because I'm basically exposing it, and so the host system is host system port 2717017 is forwarding to the container with Mongo on that port, if that makes sense. Okay. And then environment variables. So environment variables are really important, obviously. And so the things that change from right now, the things set in Docker Compose are dev only stuff. I have a separate process for the stuff for how staging and production environment variables are set. But for dev, it's all here. And so I'm obviously referencing, you'll see throughout this, the IP addresses that so for in this case, I'm setting, actually a better example is, yeah. So free switch is set to be 172.10.12, and then the free switch listener process. This is a node process that connects to free switch, and so I pass in that value here, and then it knows where to connect to. I mean, similar to Mongo, Mongo has its own IP address in our private network, and so then this process knows how to connect to it that way. And then depends on, yeah, so this is just for if it matters the order in which the containers are built. For us, it doesn't usually matter that much, but sometimes, in this case, it does, just because this particular process, the first thing it does is it tries to connect to FreeSwitch. So obviously, if FreeSwitch doesn't exist, then it's going to fail. So I have to wait until FreeSwitch is done building before it builds this initially. And then the last thing with Docker Compose I was going to mention is that you can override the command. So if you remember from in the, sorry, wait, which one was that? Compose. Oh, right, that was, yeah. So let's say for our API, just as an example. So in our API, so the default is just npm start, which npm start just runs the initial entry point file. It's pretty straightforward, but you can override that. So whatever is in the Docker file as the default start command, you can override it. And the reason why you could do it for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things I use it for is for debugging. So I don't know about you guys, but I don't run the debugger constantly for like everything. I usually, once I run into an issue, then I'll want to debug like one specific thing, right? And so for all of in my Docker Compose file, for basically all of my custom code based, anything written in Node or Angular, I will set it up so that I can optionally debug it by uncommenting. So if I want to debug it, I uncomment this command to npm run debug, and I have to uncomment this port because this is the debug port, 9229. I mean, you could change this, but this is the default port that the Visual Studio Code debugger attaches to. So if you uncomment both of these, and you could see in the package JSON what I'm doing here. Basically, it's just adding this -- inspect. Okay. So when you do this, I mean, this is something built into Node that when you run it with this inspect, it basically does it with the debugger and exposes on that port 9229 so that it allows you to attach to it. And just as a quick aside, this was something I actually wasn't even aware of until I really started getting into this. But if you do, instead of inspect, you do inspect-brk, this will automatically break at the very first line of code until a debugger attaches to it. So that could be useful if you're trying to debug your startup stuff, as opposed to this where it runs as normal, but just you could attach something and then stop it wherever you want. So I'll set it to run with the debug command, let's say, and then to attach the debugger in Visual Studio Code. Let me just. So this is the. If you guys have set this up before, I won't get too far into this since we're getting near the top of the hour, but you basically are doing a configuration in Visual Studio Code where you're just attaching to that port, and you're specifying where in the Docker container is your source code so that it can actually break on the right point. But basically this works. So like when you set it up in this way, you can set a breakpoint. It's kind of crazy that this works. You can set a breakpoint in your host system on your Visual Studio Code, like in your project you have, and the code will actually break in your container, which I didn't think was possible before I tried to do it, but it does, and it's pretty awesome. Okay. Last thing is building. So let's actually build it. And I do, just for convenience sake, I mentioned that, like, just because I'm so used to package JSON and Node, like, you don't have to do it this way. I mean, these are just all basic Docker commands from the command line, and you can do it through the Docker desktop as well. But just for convenience sake, I put a whole bunch of stuff just in a package JSON file just to have the scripts commands available. And so for our build, what it's actually doing is it's running. The main thing is it's running Docker Compose build with just some extra stuff. But this will run through, and this will run fast. So even though it's building 10 containers, it's going to be super fast right now because I didn't really make any changes. So that's one of the nice things. Even though technically, if I blew everything away and tried to rebuild it, I mean, yeah, it would take like 5 minutes or something. But since I didn't, it's quick. And then I do start, which just basically then it actually runs all of the containers. So this should be quick as well because I'm not really recreating anything. Oh, I must have changed something on the RTP engine. Oh, I think when I was messing around with the configs, it must have picked something up. Oh, well. All right, I'll go to a different window. Oops. Okay. Okay. So what you can do is, oh, geez, sorry, I magnified it a little bit too much. So this is a lot just because there's so many containers. But when I do Docker PS, what that's doing is it's showing me all the running containers. And I know this is a lot of stuff on the screen, so I apologize. I don't know a good way to display this, but it shows how long it's been up, shows what ports have been exposed, the name of it, etc. And then you can either through the desktop user interface or through the command line, you can look at like the logs in each room. So let's look at the let's look at the logs for our Angular app. So it's, this is the build of it, and then it's running. I mean, technically, I expose it through port 80, but yeah, I guess on the container, it's on 4800. And then I can actually go to it. So this is our Get Human site running all on Docker containers. So the Angular app, the server-side rendered Angular app is running on a Docker container. The API, Mongo underneath it, Elasticsearch. Actually, even at the top level, Nginx, which I didn't really even show you, but that's running in a Docker container as well. So everything, but you can access it locally. I can debug it. I can do all the stuff you normally would do anyways. Just it's all running in Docker. So that is basically it.
Is FreeSwitch your PBX or is that something else?
Yeah, PBX. Yep.
I was just typing a note in the chat because I have to jump off for another call, but that was amazing. And I just want to say how much I love the Angular Americas channel. Thank you very much. I will let you guys stay and chat. I'm sure there are questions, but I have to jump. Thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks,
no
Natty.
problem.
Thanks, Kyler. See y'all soon.
See ya. Natty, I
Sorry,
apologize.
can't
We
say
ran
the
out. I used up all the time for the quiz. We'll push that to the next one.
This is perfect because I just found a new Kahoot alternative. I was trying to create a Kahoot for today, but I just now realized you have to pay for it. And there's a free alternative. Maybe we can try it the next time with more time,
Next time,
But
yeah,
it looks like it's fun. Yeah, I will send you guys the link.
Cool. Any other questions?
No, I hope you will release something around the Docker files, so we can have something to play with. I understand you are not going to release your own Docker files with all your setup, but
no, I know what you're saying, and yes, I do want to. So
like a small Docker compose with just to get a normal basic Angular application up and running.
Yep,
that would be cool.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Hope you all have a great Friday and a great weekend. I will talk to you later. Have a good one.
See you.
Yeah.
Great
Thank you.
presentation, by the way. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.